All right, so today I watched a movie called Cutter's Way. Now, what is Cutter's Way? Turns out it's a pretty competent neo-noir starring Jeff Bridges and the dad from Home Alone. So, basic setup is a dude who is either a hustler or a boat salesman on the way to meeting his friend at a bar, breaks down in an alleyway, sees a car, sees a guy's face briefly, it drives off. Next day, turns out there's a murdered cheerleader in the trash can where he was, and he gets accused of it. Friend he went to meet is a disabled Vietnam vet, played by John Hurd, who is the dad from Home Alone, and he's made up to look like Big Boss. He's basically punished Venom Snake from Metal Gear Solid 5. Anyway, within the first 10 minutes of this movie, you realize you're going to be dealing with just deeply damaged and fucked up people. So we're talking dad from Home Alone drops a hard R N word in his first scene, and he's supposed to be the hero. But then it turns out that's kind of the theme of the thing, is like it's totally, beaten people who are on the bottom rung of society. Well, not the bottom rung of maybe polite society might be a way to put it. They're all miserable and broken. So John Hurd's character, he's Cutter. He's the titular Cutter of Cutter's Way. So he's physically scarred because he went to Vietnam. And then Jeff Bridges is sort of emotionally scarred because he has feelings for Cutter's wife. Oh yeah, before we go any further, Jeff Bridges' character's name in this movie is Richard Bone. His name is Dick Bone, and he was boning a lady in his first scene. Cutter's wife is also an alcoholic, and they're all sort of bound together by friendship and lust and obligation. Anyway, so Dick Bone gets accused of murdering this teenager. What ensues is like nobody's really able to prove anything. It was a rainy night, and then like the day after Dick Bone is questioned by the police. So the police show up and then they're just sort of out of the picture for the rest of it. Nobody can really tie anybody to this. Anyway, so Dick Bone and Alex Cutter are two heroes, and Maureen, Alex Cutter's wife, also a tragic figure. They're all together and they're at a parade, and they see a guy in the parade who's like a local businessman, rich guy, and Dick Bone's like, that's the guy I saw in that alley. And this just flips a switch for Cutter. Like, this is a guy who we saw doing slurs while he was sort of holding court in a dive bar the previous night, and then emotionally abusing his wife the next morning. He just gets a wild hair up his ass, and he's like, oh, of course, this guy, he did that shit, and we're gonna blackmail him for it. And it sort of plays out like, so I tend to make references that I feel like are more obscure than the thing I'm talking about, but I feel like Paul Schrader's gotten some good press, so the plot kind of plays out like Affliction a little bit, but kind of in a more conventional way. So it's, crime happens, and then local dumb angry guys with a misplaced sense of justice kind of go from there and get obsessed with it. This one doesn't deal with trauma in the same way, and it doesn't indict the characters in the same way as Affliction. So where Affliction is really this really great exploration of, what we're calling toxic masculinity these days, like, but Cutter has a huge chip on his shoulder. Like, he saw the vacuum at the moral heart of the universe when he was in Vietnam, and that that gives him sort of his anti-hero animus. He's convinced himself that justice isn't possible, but he's obsessed with being a hero. He's upset there's no heroes in the world, and I can get this guy. I can get this motherfucker that just, killed a teenage girl. And then throughout it, like, Cutter doesn't really treat anybody in his life very well. Like, he's incredibly abusive to just everyone. But yeah, so Cutter's the most visibly damaged of the group, but it seems like everybody's sort of damaged. So the movie goes on and it ends in a confrontation. I don't want to totally spoil it because I think it's a really good movie. So it ends in a confrontation, and it sort of resolves that confrontation, but uh, it's still so ambiguous. You never quite know for sure if Cutter's completely delusional or if he's on the money, and he just can't make the things connect because like he goes into it first for personal gain, and then he's like, I'm gonna nail this fucker. I'm gonna take this guy down and prove that there is some good in the world. So what these guys go through, it's hard to, is it worth it to get their justice? It's a maybe. I think this movie is really sensitive to how the way the real world works. Uh, some stuff I've been getting into recently, which is, you know, some like fringe conspiracy stuff, but I don't know, maybe conspiracy really isn't the right word for a lot of this stuff. But I read a book about the Franklin cover up, which Google that shit. It's insane. Last podcast on the left did like a 2 or 3 part episode. It was like Satanism in government, and they covered this thing. Jury's out on the satanic panic stuff, but I think a lot of the allegations involved with Franklin are real. Like, and with Epstein, like it, anyway, look that up. And then another thing I read was Tom O'Neill's Chaos, subtitled Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s. And I don't want to spoil that book either, but it gives you a really different perspective on the whole Manson thing and how a lot of stuff was shuffled around and covered up, and a lot of, and I guess this is picking up on what Matt Chrisman, Chapo Man, said in another vlog recently about, he kind of touched on like conspiracy thinking. Anyway, so what Cushbaum was saying about conspiracy thinking is that like it's really useful if you can kind of, if you don't find yourself married to the like the details of the conspiracy, if you're not about, if your interest in sort of conspiratorial literature thinking, what have you, as long as you're not obsessed with building an unimpeachable theory, as long as you're not trying to form the perfect opinion about it, what's useful is the contours. It really shows you what power desires, what power likes, what lengths power will go to maintain itself, and the like. We know the answers are awful. We know the answers are awful, and that's why like you know, a lot of stuff that comes up in things like Franklin, Epstein, and the Charles Manson book, and just everything. A reason why that gets dismissed as conspiracy is because, you know, if people widely believed it, there might be a little more threat to power. Anyway, this movie kind of goes along with the premise that you're not able to prove these things in a court of law, but you as an individual can gain knowledge of them, and you can be proactive about it to some extent. Yeah, I don't know where to go with that. Anyway, Cutter's Way is a good movie. It's very rough around the edges. It you know, it along with the you know, definite content warnings going into it, like it's pretty insensitive about race, and it's pretty insensitive about wanton acts of misogyny, but it's pretty clear that the movie really isn't endorsing a lot of those behaviors, but I think a lot of them kind of come from some normative shit from the time period. Anyway, I still think there's a worthwhile story in there. I think it's an interesting snapshot in time, and another thing is it's a little glimpse at what could have been for John Hurd, because he's definitely made a career and an indelible impression as a a steady character actor, if not an exceptionally gifted character actor, and it was kind of cool to see him in more or less a lead role, uh, and such a role that allowed him to be a little rough and a little eccentric, and it's really interesting to see that. I feel like his performance is kind of mixed. There's times like they do a lot with Cutter, contrasting his lucidity and his drunkenness. And there's a line like halfway through the movie where I wrote it down here. Uh, after tragedy, further tragedy befalls him, somebody offers him a drink. Does you want to get a drink? And he's like, the daily grind is what makes me drink. I take tragedy straight. It's wild. I mean, it's some hard boiled ass like bullshit dialogue, but man, I like what the guy got to do, for once, and because he has these moments of lucidity where it feels like he's whispering the secret truths of the universe into your ear. He's trying to get Jeff Bridges to sort of accept the harsh reality and accept that there are actually things he can do about it. And of course, it's sort of in a very limited way. I'd say think the ending of True Detective season 1 is kind of where this movie lands, though not as a little more ambiguous. But yeah, it kind of deals with that, you're scratching at something and you're about to see the whole big picture. You're about to see the dark underbelly of what we call order in this world. And then once you realize it's sort of infinite and all-encompassing, what do you do? Do you give up? Do you withdraw? Or, do you get your guy? Do you do one thing that can help? And art like that kind of speaks to me, I guess, even though what have I done, really? But I think there's something to be said for trying to work to that point, and even if you fail, you gotta try. I don't know. Despair seems like the easy way out to me. Barring chemical imbalances, not trying to shit on anybody for being depressed. That's goddamn. Anyway, Cutter's Way. Check it out. I liked it. 2 thumbs up for me. Yeah, that's it. I'm gonna be watching more movies, hopefully posting more of these things. Can find me on the internet. Obviously, I'll have a YouTube channel or something set up. Do most of my shit on Twitter. It's at Gnome Chamsky, GNOME. I'll just put it. I have video editing software. I can just put it right there. So do that. Check out my socials. Watch this space. I guess get in those comments. Tell me what you've been watching. Cause I like getting recommendations. Anyway, it's been real, and we'll do this again soon. Bye, everybody.